about ranked choice voting. I keep getting asked, is it a good thing, is it a bad thing, where do we stand, should we be volunteering? And the reality is, I personally don't have enough information to know. And so we decided to reach out to a professor to be here to help us. So we have Professor Sandy Maisel from Colby College here to provide us with some background. This is really designed to be informational. So feel free to give us a presentation, and it's an opportunity for us to ask our questions and to begin thinking this through as we move forward. So, Professor, welcome.
Well, Jeremy sets up the slide show, and I'd like to see where I put my clicker, which I just found. So we'll say that this is, to me, it's like a homecoming. I was a member of the state committee 40 years ago. It was exactly 40 years ago. And I was Kennebec County Chair in 1974 as well. So we'll see if the slide forward. Fortunately, there is no audio. We should be all right. Get it where it's going. Where is the computer? I have to be able to see that. My computer hit the go. All right, so I'm talking about instant runoff voting, or as it's often called, ranked choice voting. And I think before we talk about that, we ought to talk a little bit about what it is and what are the goals of an electoral system. We're clicking. And there are a few. There was a great political philosopher named Pareto who had a principle of consensus. And he said, if everybody agrees that A is a better candidate than B, A should win. I think we would all agree with that. The problem is that's not terribly useful because that never exists. So the next one is one person, one vote. We all agree about that everybody's vote should count the same. We just have to sort of remember that in the United States Senate, everybody's vote doesn't count the same. Third is the symmetry principle, which says that no system should favor one candidate over any other candidate. That the rules should be neutral. 12.5 pounds per square inch. And that if the voter's choice between candidate A and candidate B should not be determined by what they think about candidate C. So that the choice between then Governor Bush and Vice President Gore should not have been determined by what the voters thought about Ralph Nader or Pat Buchanan, or probably more to the point, the choice, whether or not the voter decided to vote for Ralph Nader should not have been determined by whether they chose Bush over Gore. There's nothing in there, in any principle of political science thing, which says that majority rule is better than plurality rule. And our Constitution, the state Constitution, of course, as you know, talks about plurality rule. So it's a judgment and it's a value that each of us can make on our own. And finally, Kenneth Arrow was an economist, won a Nobel Prize for economics for what is called this impossibility theorem. And the impossibility theorem basically says there is no perfect electoral system, that no system can meet all of the goals that you want. So, let's talk about the problem with plurality winners. Think about the 2000 vote for the presidency in Florida. Remember, there's only one winner in each state under our electoral system, so don't worry about the electoral college system. Don't worry about hanging chads or butterfly ballots or any of those things. But if you look at the electoral vote in that system, with the fancy ballot over there, we had George Bush and Dick Cheney getting 48.84%. Al Gore and...
Focus out there? Is it better?
Is it? No, it isn't. It's either the projector or all of our eyes, but it's a little bit out of focus. But I can tell you about what it says. It says, whoa.
That's fair.
A little bit back.
How about turning the lights down?
No.
No, it's the focus.
Well, I think that's about as good as it's going to get. So Bush and Cheney got about 48.84%, and Gore and Lieberman got about 48.83%. Very close. And then the others are arrayed beyond them. All of us remember Nader because we blamed the election on him. But Pat Buchanan, in fact, was on the ballot in that state and got 17,000 votes, and somebody named Harry Brown was on the ballot in that state, and there were 7 other candidates on the ballot in that state, all of whom got some votes. And we said, this is not, how it should be. Let me just say, for many of us, the reason we don't like plurality winners was the 2010 gubernatorial race in Maine. Let's just make sure we understand that that's over there, but for the purposes of giving you a discussion, I thought we'd keep away from the Maine results and try to lay it out in more general terms. So one way to achieve a majority rule, is avoiding winners for whom there is not a majority of the vote. So you simply say, we're going to not have a winner unless there's a majority, and then we had to figure out how to get to a majority. There are lots of ways in which you can do this. One of the ways is a traditional runoff election. In the South, for many years, in the primaries, if nobody has a majority, you have a runoff election a month later. And in fact, I think 3 states require a majority, and they have a runoff election if there isn't a winner. Another one is called approval voting, in which you vote for everybody for whom you approve. So if there are 5 people on the ballot and you say, okay, I can live with any of these 3, you vote for those 3, and you get more than 1 vote, and whoever gets the most votes, presuming it's a majority, is the winner. There are all sorts of problems with that. One of the problems with that is that it assumes that you approve of each person the same amount, whereas some of us approve something more than others. There is a system called border voting, which in fact many college faculties use, in which if you have 4 candidates, your first choice gets 4 points, your second choice gets 3 points, your third choice gets 2 points, your fourth choice gets 1 point. You add up all the points somebody gets, and whoever gets the most points wins. Again, the problem with that is it assumes that the difference between your first choice and your second choice is the same as your difference between your second and third, and so on. And finally, there is instant runoff voting. And let's talk a little bit about what instant runoff voting does. It is also called ranked choice voting. In instant runoff voting, each candidate casts a vote. Let's click to the next slide. Okay. So each candidate in the top left casts a vote for their first choice candidate. And they rank every candidate. So if there are 4 candidates running, you say, this is my first choice, this is my second choice, this is my third choice, this is my fourth choice. You add up just the first place votes. If anybody gets a majority after that, that person wins. If nobody gets a majority after the first, going to the bottom part of that loop, you eliminate whoever is last. So say there are 4 people, and I'm going to give you an illustration of this in a minute. You eliminate the 4th person. She or he is out. You take his or her votes, and you give them to whoever they ranked second. And then you add up all the votes again. And if anybody gets a majority, that person wins. If nobody gets a majority, you take off whoever is last at this point. That was the 3rd place finisher. You take his or her votes, you give them to the person who they had highest ranking, who was still left on the ballot, because they may have had the person who finished 4th there, but that person's gone. You add them up again, and if anybody wins, there is a winner. If not, you do it again. At that point, you're down to 2 candidates. Somebody has to get a majority at that point. So let's give an illustration of this. Back to the 2000 presidential vote in Florida. I've condensed the numbers to the top 4 finishers. So you've got Bush, Gore, Nader, and Buchanan with those numbers. The people below the line, Harry Brown and the 7 other people who none of you have ever heard of, who were like the socialist candidate, the socialist workers candidate, number of write-in candidates. They got a total of 39,475 votes, which is about 0.386%. Okay? And so the way the system goes, that's fine. You eliminate Brown and you eliminate the others. Now, in fact, you do it one at a time. So the first time you eliminate the last person, literally got 2 votes. That doesn't have much effect. Then you eliminate the person who got 30 votes. But to move it along, I've done 2 things. I moved it along very quickly, and I've taken that 40,000 and rounded it up to 50,000, to that 39,475, and rounded it up to 40,000 so I could do the math more easily. And again, simply for the purpose of an example, because we don't know who those people are, I divided those votes equally among the 4 people who were left on the ballot. Bush, Gore, Nader, and Buchanan. And the result, well, we went 1 too far, that's all right. The result was that Bush, Gore, Nader, and Buchanan are at that point, and there's still no majority, so you eliminate Buchanan, and again, for the purpose of illustration, this is not how it's going to happen because people vote irrationally all the time. I gave all of Buchanan's votes to Bush. And at that point, you have Bush with 49.30%, you have Gore with 48.83%, and you have Nader with 1.65%. And you still don't have a majority, so you have to go again. That's where they are. Now, you're going to eliminate Nader. What are you going to do with the Nader vote? So I've given you three assumptions. The first one is, assume the Nader votes divide equally between Bush and Gore. At that point, Bush has 50.235%, Gore has 49.735%, Bush wins. Let's assume that 60% of Nader's votes went to Gore. In that case, Bush would have had 50.055%, Gore would have had 49.945%, a result we still don't like. So let's assume that 2/3 of the Nader votes went to Gore, which in fact is not an irrational assumption. I'll tell you a little bit about that in a minute. At that point, finally, one more quick. Al Gore is elected. So what this means really depends on what your assumptions are and what your values are. Remember Ralph Nader in 2000? I see a number of you in this room who probably don't remember Ralph Nader in 2000. A little queasy. My students were 3 when Ralph Nader ran, but they read about it. So Nader said he really didn't hurt Gore because he said his people wouldn't have voted if they didn't vote for him. And then what, I can't remember what the number was, 97,000 or something like that? Well, frankly, I think that's wrong. But under ranked order voting, and believe under the system, the proposal that is being put forward in the state of Maine, you have your choice of not voting. So in my examples, I assumed that everybody was going to vote. I think most rational people do vote. But somebody could say, look, okay, I know my audience. I could vote for, there could be 100 people on the ballot. I still wouldn't vote for Paul LePage. You only go down 99 places. Or but you easily could say, I could say, I will vote for, in 2000, I would have voted for Vice President Gore, and I can certainly see voting for Ralph Nader, but I could even see, back in 2000, I suppose I could see, maybe voting for George W. Bush back in 2000, remember the compassionate conservative. But I'm not going to vote for Pat Buchanan, no matter what happens, and I'm not going to vote for 7 people on the ballot whose names I've never heard about, whom I know nothing, no matter what happens. So, one assumption is that everybody votes. You can decide whether that's a good assumption or not. There's also an assumption built into this, among other things, that campaigning doesn't change, and that who the candidates on the ballot are don't change. I think both of those assumptions need very careful examination. First of all, if you have ranked order voting, it seems to me there's a tremendous additive incentive for independents and third-party candidates to run. Because all the things that I'm talking about in a minute are the disadvantages or the advantages of ranked order voting encourage those people to run. Secondly, it seems to me if I were running a campaign in this kind of environment, I would, one of the arguments is, and there's data on this argument, although it's not data in partisan elections. One of the arguments is there'd be less negativity. I think there'd be different negativity, which is to say, I think you would probably see coalitions, or at least informal coalitions of candidates running, saying, vote for me, but if you can't vote for me, vote for you. But goodness, don't vote for him, no matter what, because he's evil. And I don't see the incentive to change that. So I think when you examine ranked order voting and surrender voting, and I actually am in favor of it, certainly in many circumstances, I don't think we should go into this, saying, oh, this is the be-all, the end-all, the answer to all of the problems that face our voting system. Every time we have reformed our system, think campaign finance reform. The people who are against reforming the system figure out another way around it. And the result that we have is never exactly the result that we think we're going to have. And I think when you examine instant runoff voting, or ranked choice voting, ranked order voting, you call any of those things, you have to understand it is not going to come out in the perfect world that those people who are in favor of it say it will come out in, nor will it come out in the terrible world that those people who are opposed to it say it will come out. It is going to be somewhere in between. So let's talk about what your values are, what the advantages and disadvantages are. Some of the disadvantages. First, it's complex and requires training of voters. If you all, among the most politically involved people in the state of Maine, have questions about this, and some of you who live in Portland where you use it, that still have questions about this, there are other people who have lots of questions about it. And part of the result of that will be that it won't work the way people think. People will still continue to vote for one person. Secondly, the machines are expensive. To do it the right way, you have to invest in all new voting machines that do this counting for you so that in fact it does become instant runoff voting. Third, it violates the integrity of the ballot. It only violates the integrity of the ballot if people want to violate the integrity of the ballot. But whereas in a perfect electoral system, you vote and your vote is totally secret and nobody can attach any meaning to your vote other than that you voted for candidate A. Under this system, they have to keep your ballot because if there's no majority, they have to go back and see who your second choice was and see who your third choice was. I don't have that. To me, that isn't a problem. But I also am not a conspiracy theorist. A conspiracy theorist, that's a problem. To me, as a political scientist, it is a wonderful thing because think of all the data you can. I don't think this helps third parties or independents as much as the people who argue for it thinks it helps third parties or independents. I think it helps them get on the ballot. I think it helps them to be a voice that is heard during a campaign. But I don't think in a partisan system, and we have seen very little ranked choice voting in partisan system, I do not think it's going to help third party candidates as much as they think it does. And the disadvantages, many people argue that it does not, that in a partisan system, where the two parties are still dominating, it would not change negative advertising, that in fact, campaign finance laws are the cause of negative advertising more than anything. But there are many, and it does not increase turnout. That it is very difficult to make the argument that it increases turnout because every time you make that argument, you have to hold everything else equal, and in politics you can't hold everything else equal. There are clearly differences in turnouts because of the issues, because of the context, because of what else is on the ballot, because of the candidates, all those kinds of things. Even with that, I think there are some really key advantages. First, it produces a winner who has majority support. I think that's very important in our system. We don't want minority winners. Second, it discourages strategic voting. I mean, how many times have people said, I'm not going to vote for L.A. Cutler, Libby Mitchell, Mike Mishu, say who you want to say, because that's going to be a wasted vote. There are no such things anymore under that as wasted votes. So that the strategy is simply to rank all of the candidates that you favor in the order that you favor them. None of your votes are going to be wasted. Is going to be wasted. I think the real advantage here, not often talked about by the proponents, is it allows third parties and independent candidates to perform what I believe is the real function in a two-party system, and I very fundamentally believe in a two-party system. The function that I think they have is to raise issues that are not otherwise talked about, or to express dissatisfaction with the two-party system. I think my reading of that is that was why Angus King got elected governor. However many years ago that was now, 1994, I guess. I think that's what third parties should be doing, and I think they should be raising issues like disposal of nuclear waste, or whether you were in favor of or not in favor of genetically modified foods, or any of those kinds of issues. I think that's a perfectly legitimate thing for a third party to raise, and this allows them to get their voice heard more. Under this system, when you have a partisan election, parties can still nominate their own candidates, and they can still express their preference for those candidates. And in fact, I don't see any reason why parties couldn't say, we are for our candidate, but we are also for, for your second choice, Y, for your third choice, Z, and certainly not the last person. There are long-term savings for voting, certainly significant savings over a traditional runoff. Remember I said before the machines are expensive? Well, they're expensive once, and it's a one-time expense that somebody's going to have to incur. On the other hand, it is cheaper to administer these elections over the long run if the electronic machine is doing the counting. And it has worked in various places, both home and abroad. And it works not just in, the first places that did ranked order voting were all the liberal bastions. Berkeley, San Francisco, Burlington, Cambridge, Massachusetts. But it's now in all sorts of other places as well. And people say, oh, the Americans could never get used to this. The entire country of Australia has been doing it for almost a century. When they had to do the counting by hand. Croatia does it. Ireland does it with proportional representation. So there are lots of places that do this, and they do it very successfully. And I think this is true. I don't think there's any place that has expressed dissatisfaction with the result of instant runoff voting. I don't believe there's any place that has taken it and said, we're going to undo
New York
instant runoff
City.
voting.
I'm sorry, New York City. New York City did it for about 10 years in the 30s, and they repealed it.
You win. But that may make you older than I am. But certainly if that's the case, they were doing it before computers, and they were doing it by hand counts, and it was not instant runoff voting in the way that it is now. But
Burlington, Vermont, I think it was Burlington, but Vermont got rid of it after they had it for a race.
Burlington still has it, but then it has it again. It's
Okay. Well, they repealed it after the first few days.
it's back in, I'm quite certain it's back in place. Not for gubernatorial elections, and not for congressional elections, but for local elections. Sorry, you gotta have, sorry. Remember what I said, this all depends on your values. My basic value is that over a long period of time, the two-party system works very well in finding proximate solutions to very difficult problems that our society faces, and particularly in representing the least powerful elements in society. I don't believe we would have had a civil rights movement were it not for the two-party system, as an example. In my mind, instant runoff voting is clearly to be preferred over plurality winners, especially with no minimum requirements. There are a number of places in the country which says you can, a number of places in the nation, both states and local communities, that would not have elected Governor LePage in 2010 that set a 40% or a 45% minimum for a winner with a plurality system, because there are lots of elections in which you don't have a majority winner. So I think IRV is vastly to be preferred over a plurality system which can allow a winner with 38% of the vote. I think it works best, and I think there's all sorts of evidence that it works best, when you can ideologically rank the candidates. At Colby, in our faculty elections, we use instant runoff or rank order voting. But if you're voting based on who you know, or you're voting based on how long you've been teaching at Colby, or you're voting based on gender or whatever you're voting based on, not based on that, I'm a liberal on the faculty and somebody else is a conservative on the faculty and somebody else is a moderate. Those aren't the issues that are raised here. But when you have very clear ideological issues, this is a very good system of voting. The problem with that is, in the American system, ideology is not always clear. You have all sorts of people who are economic liberals and social conservatives, or economic conservatives and social liberals, and it's very difficult to figure out how people are going to rank those. It's very difficult with my value system to figure out how I want people to rank those. I think it clearly would benefit primary elections. By the way, we use instant runoff voting in the presidential caucuses in the Democratic Party in Maine. We just don't call it that. But that's exactly what we do. It's the same logic of the system, and I think it makes all sorts of sense in a primary election, particularly if you have a crowded primary election. I can't predict how campaign strategies would change. I just don't know that. I don't think anybody else knows that. One of the things you find in listening to political scientists being quoted in the media in the state of Maine is we often say things that we really don't know, that we feel. Kyle Bailey, who's here today, sent me a clip that I recorded on Pat Callahan's show back in, must have been 2012, I think. And what I said about instant runoff voting, which is why he sent it to me, was I still believe. But one of the things I said about a number of other things, and well, I was so far off base in that, it was unbelievable. My colleague from Bowdoin was just as far off base, by the way, on the same. I think that one of the people who are helped in this system is an independent who's willing to fund their own campaign. And I do believe that campaign finance reform is in many ways much more important than electoral reform is, both nationally and in the state of Maine. The other thing that I fear, which nobody talks about, is there are going to be even more minor candidates in the belt. Do you remember, I can't even remember which gubernatorial election was, maybe 2 ago or 3 ago, well, maybe it was 06. 2006, there must have been 6 or 7 candidates, and every time you had a debate, they were all up there, and you really only wanted to listen to Baldacci and whoever the Republican was, Woodcock, and all these other people who were really clogging the airways. And I think, while I believe in everybody having equal access, what that does to the citizens is it makes it much more difficult for them to sort it out. We can talk, you're going to all talk about what happened in the 2014 gubernatorial election, but I think even in that election, that was part of the problem. So I think that one of the problems with this is that you're going to even have more minor parties, making it much more difficult for the major parties to have their voice heard, and making it much more difficult for the voters to have a clear choice. But those are all based on my values, and yours are equally important for you as mine are for me. So I think I will leave it right there, let you ask any questions, and certainly feel free if any of you want to send me an email and ask me any questions. I'll be glad to do that. And we have a few minutes?
Yeah, absolutely.
A few minutes to answer questions now. Thank you all very much.